Shalom and welcome to NeshamaCast, exploring Jewish spiritual care today, brought to you by Neshama, Association of Jewish Chaplains. I'm your host, Rabbi Ed Bernstein. This is the special edition of NeshamaCast Live that was recorded before a live audience at the NAJC conference in Skokie, Illinois, May 12th, 2025. Thank you to Rebecca Carroll, the conference chair, and the conference committee for creating the space for NeshamaCast Live. Now here's the show.
Laila Tov, everybody. I'm David Balto, and I'm from Washington, D.C., and I am so proud of being part of the NeshamaCast team, along with Ed. We have a wonderful evening tonight to watch a live NeshamaCast broadcast. I'm sure, like you've been like me, looking forward every week or so for the latest NeshamaCast, which is a wonderful breath of fresh air, telling us of the wonderful work that each of us as Jewish chaplains are doing. NeshamaCast does a wonderful job of going and building our Jewish community and telling us how much each of us are doing. Today we're going to hear about rising from the ashes in Los Angeles, one of the worst national disasters, with Rabbi Shira and Rabbi Jason Weiner. Shira serves as the Disaster Spiritual Care Manager for the American Red Cross and the Division Advisor for the Northeast and lead for Massachusetts and Northern New England. And Dr. Jason Weiner serves as the Senior Rabbi and Director of the Spiritual Care Department at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles and the Rabbi for Knesset Israel Synagogue of Beverlywood, and is the author of a number of wonderful texts about pastoral care and halakha. We're all led by our wonderful moderator, Ed Bernstein, who single-handedly has brought this tremendous product to fruition. We didn't know that he was the next Ed Murrow of this generation. He serves as the staff chaplain at the Boca Raton Regional Hospital and is our beloved producer and host of the NeshamaCast. So with that, let me turn things over to Ed.
Good evening and welcome to the first ever NeshamaCast Live. It's so good to be with everyone here in Skokie and Chicago, my hometown. As I'm sure Pope Leo knows, you can take the boy out of Chicago, but you can't take Chicago out of the boy. I'm eager to start talking with our wonderful guests, and I will in just a moment. However, there's a great Yiddish saying, Eder efhebon will ich sagen a paar Wörter, which means, before I begin, I'd like to say a few words. When I made a professional transition to chaplaincy nearly a decade ago from the pulpit rabbinate, my journey was made easier in large measure by the chaplain colleagues I met through NAJC. And I was inspired by many of the personal stories of our colleagues. We as Jewish chaplains have great stories. Even as we listen to and validate other stories, we have our own. And we have great Torah. We have wonderful opportunities to come together, such as we are right now at this NAJC conference, and to share our wisdom and our lives with one another. However, I think the lives we as chaplains lead are so rich, and the wisdom and Torah we have to share are so compelling. The wider public needs to know what it is that Jewish chaplains do and who we are as human beings, why we do what we do. The goal of NeshamaCast is to utilize the powerful and popular medium of podcasting to bring our stories, our wisdom, our Torah the Torah of Jewish chaplaincy into the public square through conversations that are, on the one hand, sophisticated and evidence-based, and at the same time, accessible and interesting to a lay audience. I believe that through NeshamaCast, we have the potential to enhance our platform as Jewish chaplains and help us do our job in bringing more kindness, goodness, and compassion into our world. So 2 years ago, as I was just reminiscing with our dear colleague, Rabbi Joe Ozorowski, I floated the crazy idea of this podcast, and our leadership encouraged me to run with it, and I'm grateful for their trust. I'm also grateful to our amazing guests who have appeared on NeshamaCast through 2 seasons of NeshamaCast. Some 32 members of NAJC have appeared on the program. Our guests have shared a bit of themselves, and they've shared a bit of the Torah of Jewish spiritual care. Many past guests are in the room tonight. I want to thank once again all of our past guests for trusting in the NeshamaCast project. It would not happen without all of you. Our archive of recordings of every single recording of NeshamaCast they all appear on our feed, and all of them together as a collective body embody the notion of one spirit, many paths, which is our theme for this conference. I'd like to make a pitch to the NAJC members in the room. I'm looking for more people to join me, as well as David Balto, on the NAJC Social Media Committee, which produces NeshamaCast and employs other social media platforms such as Facebook and LinkedIn to share our Torah of Jewish spiritual care with the wider world. Please speak to me during the conference about joining the NAJC Social Media Committee. One more ask, as we look towards a 3rd season of NeshamaCast, I'm hoping to upgrade the production process, which would entail a higher quality of production, but also entail more financial resources. I'm working with our NAJC leadership to develop some specific sponsorship opportunities for the podcast. In the meantime, please consider inviting your institutions to sponsor either an episode or an upcoming season of NeshamaCast that will help bring this to an even wider audience. So now let's turn to the topic of the evening and my conversation with my dear colleagues, our dear colleagues, Rabbi Jason Weiner and Rabbi Shira Stern, on rising from the ashes in LA. At the time of the Los Angeles fires, I had just returned from Israel, where I participated in a post-October 7th related seminar at the Natal Israel Center on Trauma and Resiliency. I happened to be with several of our NAJC colleagues, some of whom are with us here in the room tonight. During that seminar, we learned a technical term from the trauma field that trauma therapists were using in Israel in response to October 7th. And that term is shared traumatic reality. This term refers to situations in which the helper and the helpee, the psychotherapist and the client, the chaplain and the patient or the client, are together exposed to the same communal disaster. Jason, let me turn to you first. When the fires erupted, I immediately thought of you and our other colleagues in the LA area in the context of shared traumatic reality. Could you describe for us your experience during those days in January on a personal level? And then how did you navigate the divide between your and your family's personal safety on the one hand and your professional duties in supporting others?
Sure, thank you. And first, let me just say, as a longtime listener to the podcast, Rabbi Bernstein, you do a great job. I listen to every episode, and we really appreciate it. It's an honor to be on it with you. And Rabbi Stern, the rabbi's rabbi, chaplain's chaplain. I mean, one of the greatest of the great. It's an honor to be here with you. And I'm sure we'll recollect how the leadership you provided in LA during that time. In our hospital, Cedar Sinai, we're right in the middle of Los Angeles. So there was 2 major fires in Palisades and Altadena. And one day, the beginning of the week, Monday, you can see the flames. We have a view from the top floors of our hospital, West LA. You can see the smoke coming, getting bigger and bigger, and then soon you can see flames. And each day you can see it actually getting closer to the point where it was at near like the Getty Center, which is pretty close to us. You can see actually see the flames from the hospital. And then when you look on the other side of the hospital towards the east, towards downtown LA, you can see that the whole sky was black with smoke. So it was both sides of us. And then by Wednesday of that week, there was also a fire one night near the Hollywood sign. It was only about a mile away from us. So at one point, I remember standing on a bridge in our hospital. There was probably 80 nurses and staff on the bridge also. And we're looking and we're seeing literally flames just to the west, just to the east. The skies are black. And people were like, is this like the end of the world? Like it was really scary. And by that point, the majority of my staff, we have 15 full-time, the majority of our spiritual care department was not able to come in to work anymore. The hospital had actually taken out hotel rooms, which was reminiscent of COVID. That's what they did also at that time. We had already learned at that point that one of our CPE interns had lost his home. And we began hearing about colleagues who were losing their homes. And it was sort of like how bad it's going to get, especially because we're used to fires in rural areas, but this had really encroached into urban areas. Thankfully, my neighborhood where I lived is pretty far inland, and so I wasn't where my family was safe because I felt like I could be dedicated at the hospital, trying to call colleagues and be supportive. Our hospital was totally understaffed at that point, so many people were out. And everyone was trying to, it was like all hands on deck, just trying to see how we could help and what we could do. And the scary part was that it really reminded us of COVID in some ways.
Shira, you were an early guest on the NeshamaCast, and in that interview, you described your service with American Red Cross and several of your deployments over the years. I'd like you to tell us how you got deployed to this disaster, and what did you do once you were on the ground? And in the course of telling us, I'd like to know what the experience was like for you, and what did you do? What did you see? What did you hear? What did you smell? And were you scared for your personal safety? How did you take care of yourself while caring for others? Well,
so I got a call on Wednesday night. At 9:30 at night from my national staff disaster spiritual care person who said, can you get on a plane tomorrow morning? And I'm usually there 2 weeks later or maybe 3 weeks later, and I start doing all of the condolence care visits, and that's what I'm used to. This was a very different experience. It was a little bit like responding to 9/11, living in Jersey. I was on the front line and I was there on day 2. I was there for 4 months, and it was a very visceral reaction for many of us. Coming to LA, I have to say that coming in to LAX, you could see the fires on the ridge as we came in. And it occurred to me that what I saw in the newspapers, was static. What I saw in front of me was alive. And it was very frightening. We were told that we were to sleep with our clothing, our credentials, and our phones by the door. Because we had 30 seconds in which to evacuate. And if we couldn't get dressed that fast, then we were gonna come out without anything on, because that was it. And just that little reminder that the fires were lapping, at the sides of the hotel, those were the things that were really frightening, but not even as frightening as it was to see the utter destruction. And I don't mean the houses that were gone, and I don't mean the seared mountainside. I'm talking about the destruction I saw in the eyes of the people who came. Much of my time there was at the Pasadena shelter, where we had 550 people who would eventually be there for at least 3 to 4 weeks, because they had nowhere to go, absolutely nowhere to go, and no one to go with them. And we had, in matter of days, we had to have everything set up so that people were properly cared for. We had 2 different hospital facilities that were actually ensconced in the shelter itself. We had isolation units because of course we had COVID and norovirus and the flu and strep and people who were in hospice. We had 2 hospice patients who were in the process of actively dying. And while it was deeply distressing, very distressing for the people who were watching it, it allowed me to be a chaplain in a way that I knew best. And so when I got to talk to people, and I got to talk to people all the time, every day, 14 hours, I would walk up and down the corridors, making sure that all of my team, and I was overseeing spiritual care, mental health, health services, and disaster disability integration, DDI, or DEI, depending on what organization you belong to. They had everything they needed. And I got to talk to people and listen to their stories. I was there one night, and just as I was hoping to get out before 8 o'clock, the nurse came up to me and she said, I know that there is someone in, dorm 3 who has COVID, and she refuses to get tested, and I am at my wit's end. I need you. I went over to her and she looked at me and she said, you're going to tell me what to do, aren't you? I said, actually, my name is Shira, and I'm a chaplain. I'm very careful about language, but people don't understand disaster spiritual care. They understand chaplain. Chaplain, talk to me. And she started, there's nothing that I really need to say. And I'm very comfortable here, and I know I don't have COVID, and I think that these people should leave me alone. And I looked down, and out of her backpack, there was an electronic piano. And I looked and went, oh, you're a musician. That's so cool. Eyes lit up. She didn't stop talking for 20 minutes. She took a breath and she looked at me and she said, you're going to ask me to get tested, aren't you? I said, the thought occurred to me. She said, will you stay with me? That's why I went to LA.
Wow.
And yes, she did.
Wow. Oh, God. That's why we do what we do, isn't it? So, our colleague, Rabbi Stephen Roberts, wrote the textbook Disaster Spiritual Care. And when he was on the NeshamaCast, he described what he calls the life cycle of a disaster. There are the initial days of response in which there is, it's very stressful, but there's also great community cohesion. It's a heroic time. It's a time of a honeymoon because everyone is nice to one another. And then eventually that honeymoon period wears off. The event falls out of the news cycle for most people. The world turns its attention to other things. But the people in the heart of the disaster are stuck in their reality, and they can get disillusioned. And then there's a period of coming to terms with the loss and working through the grief, which eventually leads to some semblance of reconstruction. So we're now more than 4 months past the fires. Where we are now, what have you observed about the life cycle of this disaster, and where are we now? Shira, let's start with you on this.
The Red Cross is a crisis intervention organization, and therefore we come in and we help and we get people on their feet. We actually never close a shelter without making sure that every single person has a place to go that's either permanent or semi-permanent. And we make sure that they have the wherewithal to continue the life that they're not going to reconstruct. We're not there for the long haul, except when we are. So generally speaking, if it's a national deployment, we then hand it over after 4 months or so to the local chapters of the Red Cross, and we have several in LA, and they continue to take care of people as needed, and there is a tremendous need. On the other hand, I have to say that what I saw was an incredible response on the part of people from Los Angeles. Wait, 13,000, repeat that, 13,000 volunteers within the first week. And there were chaplains, because I talked to hospitals, and there were people who were willing to do feeding, and people who were willing to clean cots, and people who were willing to hand out, all the necessities, etc. It was unbelievable. That also required training. That continues on a local level. We don't go back for that. There are several level 7 disasters. Level 7 reflects the amount of money that is given out. It is in excess of $10.5 million. We do give money to everybody who needs it, and we give it in ways that we establish, and there's a protocol for that. But we make sure that people have what they need. What happens after that is then taken care of on a local level.
Yeah, so Jason, you're there year round. In Cedar Sinai, you see a large cross section of the community. What have you been observing recently in the way people are dealing with trauma? And specifically, of course, many people lost their homes, but there are also many people who did not lose their homes but are still traumatized. How are the different experiences of trauma playing out now among the people you serve?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's complicated. It's been very complicated because during the time of the fires, as Rabbi Stern pointed out, I was very impressed also. I felt like people really were there for each other. There was a sense of connection and communal care and concern. There were a lot of people who lost their homes and were deeply impacted. Most people, after a week and a half or so and the fires died down, basically went back to normal. And so the challenge has been, we still have so many colleagues who their lives have been completely uprooted. They've lost their possessions and their homes. And yet there's other people that's sort of like, oh, there was a really bad week and now we've moved on. And so the challenge has been, how do we make sure that we hold those people and continue to turn to them and recognize that we're not just moving on because they haven't moved on yet. So we've actually had, we have town hall meetings for our leadership every week. And we dedicated a few of them. A few weeks later, after things had, so to speak, gotten back to normal for most people, we made sure to stop and have pauses to talk about resilience, to talk about our colleagues and what they were going through, and to make sure that we weren't forgetting about the people that are still impacted and ensuring that they still have our care and concern. We're not just moving on to the next big issue, because there's been plenty of other big issues, but we're trying to keep everyone together, so to speak, and feeling that like we felt that first week.
Jason, you are a respected authority in Jewish medical ethics and halakha, Jewish law, and you've been our teacher here at NAJC at the conference so many times. And in addition to your work at Cedar Sinai. You are also the rabbi of an Orthodox congregation. What are issues from the fire that you have had to deal with as, say, a medical ethicist? And what are ways in which you provided halakhic guidance to your shul community, particularly as you balanced matters such as Shabbat observance and pikuach nefesh, saving a life?
Thank you for your kind words. So basically, to give a complete answer, there's two areas in the Shulchan Aruch that deal with what we would call medical ethics. One of them is in Orach Chaim, Hilchot Shabbat, Shin Chavchet, 328. That is the laws of the different types of patients. That we don't call medical ethics. That we just call categories of patients. Then in Yeridea, Shin Lamatet, 339, that's what we call medical ethics. You know, stopping the wood chopper, removing the pillow, those questions that are very gray. I love the gray areas. That's medical ethics. That's always confusing and challenging and different. This really wasn't medical ethics because it was black and white. Jewish law says to save a life, you do anything. The problem was people were not certain that they could do what they needed to do. As Rabbi Stern pointed out, there was a lot of things that are happening. We were told, you know, that you have to have your phone with you at all times, for example, because there was a warning system that would warn people in which certain neighborhoods when they had to run. And if you had to leave, you couldn't really walk because you wouldn't be able to get far enough. So you'd have to get in a car. There was also a fast day that week. So people that had, you know, respiratory concerns, could they fast? So interestingly, the Shulchan Aruch there in Shin Chavchet says that Kol HaShoel Harei Shofech Damim. If you ask a question, it's like bloodshed. Like don't ask, just do it. But then it says something even stronger there. It says B'chol HaNishal Harei Maguna. If the rabbi who's asked the question, it's a disgrace. It means they didn't teach people well enough. So my synagogue, 3 different people called me that Thursday. What are we gonna do for Shabbat? Should we have our phone with us? Can we drive? And I was a little bit like embarrassed. I was like, my shul, they didn't know that they could do this. I haven't taught them well enough. Like I haven't brought this up enough. So I wrote up like a letter that I sent out to our synagogue and I posted on social media and different community lists that people have, you know, respiratory concerns. They shouldn't fast. If people should keep their phones on, keep at least one phone on their house, keep it with them. If people can leave in a Uber, that's ideal. But if they had to drive, that they should drive. That they should have a backpack. People are concerned. Can they have muksa items in their bag? Everyone should have a backpack, whatever they might need. Which, by the way, brought up great conversations over Shabbos. What did you put in your bag? What's your one bag of? If you could just have one bag of possessions, what did you put in there? And it brought really interesting conversations. People had very different things that they brought. Maybe for another time. But that was basically an experience from a medical ethics.
Shira, when we spoke previously on NeshamaCast, it was right around the 5th anniversary of the Pittsburgh Tree of Life shooting. You were, of course, deployed to Pittsburgh in 2018 in the immediate aftermath of that shooting. And you also returned there several years later to support the survivors and the families of the victims during the trial of the perpetrator. You mentioned about American Red Cross gets out of a situation except when it doesn't. I'm wondering to what extent is National ARC remaining involved in the ongoing recovery effort, and under what circumstances might you get redeployed to Los Angeles in this case?
I believe that I'm not going to be redeployed to Los Angeles. I was deployed for a month to Florida during Hurricane Ian because there were that many people who were not able to get access to the American Red Cross. And therefore, we needed people to continually support them. But disaster spiritual care does something very special. We don't only care for the client. We also, and for the community, we also care for each other. We care for our volunteers and our staff. And those people who took intakes, I mean, what do you and I do all the time when we sit with patients? We listen to these stories. We are the repository of the amazing angst and resilience and hope and despair and sadness and anxiety that is present in a disaster. And these people, not trained at all, are the ones who are doing simply the intake for what have you lost? What was your house before it moved down, in the flood or burned? And they were the ones who needed support. So many of us went back in order to be able to support those who were supporting others. And that was absolutely critical, because when we talk about communal trauma, that's it. We're talking about understanding the breadth of the impact of disaster. And that has long-standing effects. Now, there are people who, after a disaster, have a tremendous growth. And there's actually spiritual growth after a disaster is more and more prevalent. And we're beginning to understand how to finesse that growth so that it becomes resiliency, long-term resiliency. By the way, I wish I had a stress ball, but resiliency is not like a stress ball. You close your hand on a stress ball and you open it up and it returns to its original shape. No human being returns to their original shape. No human being returns to their original feelings about their home, about their city, about their community, about their shul. They have to find ways in which to recalibrate their GPS. I've been hearing that today. We have to figure out how to recalibrate our GPS. And so true resiliency is not going back to what we used to be. True resiliency is finding a new way to move forward.
I want to continue the theme of resiliency. First, a little show and tell. So there was a conservative synagogue in Pasadena, a Pasadena Jewish temple and center that burned to the ground. A rabbinical school classmate of mine, Rabbi Joshua Levine Greater, had been the spiritual leader of that community, and he went to lead a nonprofit, but he remained in the community. His home was destroyed, the shul was destroyed, and of course, people from around the country and around the world sent contributions, and I sent a contribution to the shul. And just last week, I got in the mail this beautiful thank you note, and it's written by a Hebrew school student. She signed her name Dahlia. I'm guessing from the handwriting that maybe she's 10 years old or so, but she wrote, "Thank you for your donations and support. It means a lot to spend your time helping us. Thank you, Dahlia." And beautiful colors. There's a definition of resilience that I learned at the Natal Center in Tel Aviv that I thought of when I got this card in the mail. Resilience is the ability to withstand adversity and bounce back from difficult life events. Being resilient does not mean a person doesn't experience stress, emotional upheaval, and suffering. Resilience involves the ability to work through emotional pain and suffering. It is the ability to recover despite periodical setbacks, problems, and inabilities by oneself or with the help of others. So the letter I got from this girl is me one little sign of resilience. Jason, to what extent are you observing resiliency in the broader community right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe I'll answer you with the story. I started working at Cedar Sinai in 2007. I was filling in for Rabbi Levi there, blessed memory, who was a proud member of NHAC. And he wasn't well, and so I was just filling in for him in the hopes that he would come back very soon after. And sometimes he would come back for a few days at a time, and I'd ask him all my questions. So it was my first exposure to chaplaincy, and it was somewhat difficult for me at first. And one day I said to him on one of our walks, "Don't you ever find it depressing working in a hospital? People are sick, people are dying, there's so much suffering." it's a hard place to be all day. So he said to me, what do you mean, hospital? Look around. This isn't a hospital, this is an art museum. Okay, that's true about our hospital. But then he gave me his real answer, which goes to your question, which I thought was so beautiful. He said, it's true that the people in the hospital, that their bodies are not well. But spiritually, people you meet in the hospital are oftentimes the most in touch spiritually. He said, where else do you meet someone and within a minute or two of meeting a total stranger, they're crying, they're opening up to you, they're sharing all their fears and hopes and dreams and disappointments. And so this is a place where people are, actually his line was, this is the place where the temporarily well take care of the temporarily not well. But his point was that people are often whole on the outside and broken inside, and sometimes people are whole and broken on the inside and whole on the outside. And what I've noticed is that people are more in touch with that lately. It has been my experience. People are, since the fires, people have been willing to open up. It says that the luchos, the shivrei luchos, menachem ga'aron, the broken tablets and the whole tablets are together in the ark. And even though the Talmud uses that as a way of saying to have respect for someone with dementia, that they're considered the broken tablets, I always thought you could say, based on what Rabbi Meir taught, that maybe it's teaching that those people that we sometimes think are so whole, deep down are broken. And those people who we sometimes think are so broken, well, as the Kotzker said, there's nothing as whole as a shattered heart. And what I've been finding is that people, just like as Rabbi Sir pointed out, she was so right, that people were so giving and resilient and kind that week. There's been an openness to go back to those difficult places and to recognize, even though we've tried to move on, we have seen some horrible things, and there's been a lot of suffering, and we're willing to talk about them if someone's willing to have the conversation.
It would be so much easier if, in the context of a disaster, and we talked about the life cycle of the disaster, you have the real bad stuff, and then there's a path to recovery, and then people move on. But we know the life cycle of a disaster is not perfectly linear, just as the stages of grief are not perfectly linear. After several weeks or months of recovery, something can happen that is triggering. And I must say, when I saw on TV the terrible fires in Israel burning up the center of the country on Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, after my initial horror and my angst over one more emergency on Israel's plate, next thing my mind turned to was, I wonder what Jews in Los Angeles are thinking right now. So, Jason, as a year-round resident of LA, what was it like witnessing the fires in Israel while your own community was so fresh from its own disaster and fire?
Yeah, for sure, there was an added sense of empathy, because immediately when I saw that, I recognized, first of all, how bad it can be and how scary it is at the time. And I reached out to a lot of friends in Israel, which I'm not sure if I would have done that, to be honest. I mean, I hope I would have, but I don't know that I would have, because right away when I saw that, I was putting myself in their shoes and recognizing, like, it's a big deal that I appreciated it, especially because of having gone through it.
Shira, how about you? What was it like for you watching the coverage, given your experience in that way?
So I had a scratch and sniff experience because I watched the fires in Israel on TV, and my eyes started to tear up and I couldn't breathe. And I realized I was, every morning as I drove from the hotel to the Pasadena shelter, my windows were closed. I made sure that the air was recirculating. And by the time I got there, you could barely hear me speak because there was so much smoke in my lungs. And as I was watching this, it was a visceral reaction. I was there. I walked right into it. And yes, there are times when we look at things that trigger us and we experience things that trigger us. And the measure of our ability to be resilient is how we, not that we don't have those moments, but how we recover from those moments. And you can't do it alone. You need to do it with other people. You need to have people who speak your language. I said to my husband the other day, you know, I got to Chicago and I feel like I've come home. Not that Chicago's home. I'm not moving. I like Massachusetts. However, I walked into NAJC and I felt like I was home because people spoke my language. And that is necessary for people who are in recovery. You know, we say that people who are in recovery forever. Well, there will always be parts of New Yorkers that will remember the morning, that Tuesday, beautiful 9 o'clock, gorgeous morning. I know exactly where I was when I first heard that first phone call and I saw the second plane go in. I will always remember that. I still haven't gone down to ground zero. I've not been to the memorial. I spent 4 months there. I don't know that I'm ready yet to go see that, but I will always remember. People will always remember what it was like to know, oh my God, the fire is jumping over the highway, which is an insane, I mean, the pictures that we saw from within were horrifying. And yes, that will be triggered many years to come. Yeah. But we're here to help.
Yeah. Shira and Jason, as we near conclusion, on nearly every episode of NeshamaCast, our guests, our NAJC colleagues have shared messages of Torah, often related to the particular season of the year that we happen to be recording that program. So right now we are, just to situate ourselves, we are more than halfway in the counting of the Omer between Pesach and Shavuot. We're about to mark Lag BaOmer this week, which incidentally has this tradition of creating bonfires. And around the corner is Shavuot, the season of the giving of our Torah. What Torah is speaking to you now in light of our discussion and the season we're in? Shira?
So Moses is on the top of Sinai, and the entire mountain is silent. In order for Moshe to be able to hear God's voice, everything had to be silent. For me, I'm studying Musar with a colleague in Massachusetts. And just the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about Shira. And I realized that all of my life, my professional life, has been governed by this understanding of how to use silence in my work, in my personal life, with my kids, with my grandchildren. It is a skill I'm still working on. I remember being at the Boston Marathon at the 2 blocks away from the finish line. And there was a memorial with teddy bears and letters and flowers and all the rest. And people would watch the FBI agents from 2 blocks away doing their thing. And we would hand out what we call the water bottle ministry. We'd be handing out the water bottles to people. And I looked at one woman and I offered, and I usually say, may I offer you some? I didn't say anything. I looked at her and I gave her the water bottle. And she took it from me and her eyes never left the finish line. Was she a runner who managed to get there early enough so she was there before the bombs went off? Was she someone who lost a friend because there were a number of young people who had died? Was she someone who knew someone who knew someone? Or was this the first disaster she had ever experienced? And I didn't know. And I stood with her for 45 minutes. At the end of which she turned to me, she threw her arms around me, she cried for 1 minute and she walked away. Neither she nor I said a word. And she taught me the power of patience in using silence. It takes a long time 45 minutes is a long time not to say anything, especially when you know you have all those water bottles in the emergency vehicle behind you, and you have to fill them out. You have to get them out, but it's like having 60 patients that you know you have to see, and yet people in front of you, that's what your concern is now. Don't look ahead, don't look back, you have to look at the person who's right there. So for me, my Torah, my understanding of how chaplaincy and Torah and my life has intersected is understanding the incredible power of silence, whether or not it is Aaron after the sons have died, or whether or not it's the reach quiet as God is speaking our Torah to us.
Jason, the confession.
Wow, very beautiful. During the Shira period, I'm thinking about now as I relate to the fires and the Shira, the Shira period is considered also somewhat of a mourning period. And the rabbis say it's because Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students have just died. Actually, it says 12,000 pairs students died. So there is a theory that, the Talmud says, Shelo noagu kavod zeh b'zeh. They weren't respectful to each other. So as they were disrespectful, they died in a plague, and then we mourn. But there's a lot of questions about that explanation. And there's sort of an academic theory that I find very compelling and actually very meaningful, which is that the Talmud was using code language. It didn't actually say what really happened because this was a time of rebellion against Roman oppressors. And it was in the period of Bar Kokhba revolts, and it ended up leading to the final exile of the Jewish people from Israel. And so what it really meant was that, and we know that ancient military strategy was that there were pairs, all leaders were in pairs. So we usually hear that story and we think that people were like charusas or something, and they were like mean to their charusa. But perhaps what actually was happening was that Rabbi Akiva was trying to get the people to rebel against their oppressors, but yet they just couldn't get along. They just couldn't figure out, have a common goal and a common bond, and they just could not work together. There was no sense of unity and sense of purpose, and they just floundered, and they just couldn't accomplish anything. And when I think about, and Rabbi served it so well, I was really proud I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I was proud of the resilience that people in LA showed that week. Of course, like every disaster, and this was true, I lived in New York during 9/11, and there was incredible resilience. And then a little time goes by, and it becomes political, and it becomes, people start fighting again, and it goes back to their old ways. And my hope, and I think that it's there, as I mentioned before, but it needs a little bit of coercing, is that we can remember what it was like during those difficult days, how people showed respect and patience and tolerance for each other, and love and kindness to strangers. And we can learn from the example of Rabbi Akiva's students who struggled with that. It ended up being their downfall, and we still mourn for it. And that we can try to take that inspiration, that resilience from those early days, and bring them into future days. As hopefully we don't have the same disasters, but we still live together in community. Hopefully we can do so with kindness and patience and a sense of unity and purpose.
Thank you. The rabbis teach us Marbet Torah, Marbet Chayim. The more Torah, the more life. And you create life through your Torah that you've taught us. The Torah, the example of your personal lives that you do, that you bring into the community through your care, loving kindness, that you model to all of us. May you both be blessed with health and safety and fulfillment in all of your endeavors. And thank you for participating in the first NeshamaCast Live. Thank you to my brother, Henry Bernstein, for being our on-site producer today. Thank you to Allison, Atterberry, and Gabe Sniman for all the incredible work they do for NAJC and this conference. Thank you to David Balto for his lovely introduction and for joining the NeshamaCast team. Our amazing theme music is a Niggun for Ki'anu Amecha, written and performed by our NAJC colleague, Reb-Cantor Lisa Levine. And you all got the programs on your seats. Thank you to my daughter, Esther Bernstein, for designing these beautiful programs. May we all work together to heal our world. Thank you so much.